Son, you missed your turn. This road's gone real and the edges burn. Honesty don't whisper, it kicks down doors. So brace yourself for what the jukebox is for. This is FAFO, holler it loud. Fuck around with fiction, get the facts drawn. Getting triggers just the cost of the crowd. We're toxic to the lies, truth we're proud. This is FAFO, no smooth talk, no vow. You brought your stories, we brought the real. Now run your mouth and meet the South down. Fuck around and find out, burn it down.
Some time back, I received in the name of our country the bodies of 4 Marines who had died while on active duty. I said then that there is a special sadness that accompanies the death of a serviceman, for we're never quite good enough to them. Not really, we can't be, because what they gave us is beyond our powers to repay. And so when a serviceman dies, it's a tear in the fabric, a break in the whole, and all we can do is remember. It is, in a way, an odd thing to honor those who died in defense of our country, in defense of us, in wars far away. The imagination plays a trick. We see these soldiers in our mind as old and wise. We see them as something like the founding fathers, grave and gray-haired. But most of them were boys when they died, and they gave up 2 lives, the one they were living and the one they would have lived. When they died, they gave up their chance to be husbands and fathers and grandfathers. They gave up their chance to be revered old men. They gave up everything for our country, for us. We owe them a debt we can never repay. All we can do is remember them and what they did and why they had to be brave for us.
There are holidays built around celebration, excitement, and escape. Holidays where people gather together to laugh, to eat, to relax, and forget the stress of everyday life, at least for a little while. But Memorial Day was never meant to be just another long weekend. It was never supposed to become just merely cookouts and department store sales, beer, vacations, or social media posts. Memorial Day was built on sacrifice, on graves, on folded American flags handed to grieving families, on empty seats at dinner tables that never got filled again. It is a holiday rooted in the painful reality that freedom, real freedom, has always carried at terrible human cost. Somewhere tonight, there are mothers who still think about sons who never came home, wives who never got another phone call, children who grew up without fathers or mothers because somebody answered a call to duty and paid for it with their life. Modern society moves incredibly fast now. People argue politics online, scroll endlessly through distractions, and complain constantly about everyday frustrations. But Memorial Day, it forces America to stop for one moment and remember something uncomfortable, but profoundly important. Every freedom people casually enjoy today exists because somebody stood between civilization and chaos. And these men and women were willing to sacrifice everything for people they would never meet. Today on the FAFO Podcast, we have a special presentation for you, and it's Memorial Day. And we figured we're going to go outside the norm and what we usually talk about and all these different things and just honor the sacrifice and the forgotten meaning of America's most sacred holiday. So join us today. If you want to become part of the conversation, it's easy to do. Just hop down in the comment section, leave your thoughts as we go through the podcast today. We always try to read your stuff on air, so it just doesn't sit there. If you have questions, ask them. If you have statements, make them. But you can do that by becoming part of the show. If you're just listening to this podcast through Spotify, through Apple Podcast or Amazon Music, and you want to be part of the conversation, we're live every weekday, Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. You can join us on Kick at the FAFO Podcast, or you can follow us on Facebook. Either way, you can become part of the conversation. And if you're following it later on YouTube, when the show goes up fully, Rumble or Facebook, drop your comments there. I'll get to them and I'll read them in the next show. Either way, we welcome you to the FAFO Podcast, and let's get this Memorial Day rolling. Memorial Day, and we have to be clear about this because sometimes there's confusion. You got Memorial Day and you got Veterans Day. Memorial Day is not Veterans Day. And I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings in modern America, is confusing Memorial Day with Veterans Day. The two holidays, while they are connected, but they're not the same. See, Veterans Day honors those who served. Memorial Day honors those who died while in service. It is dedicated specifically, and not just, and let me clarify that, not just in service, but those who gave their lives, those who lived that life to the end, even after they left the service, those who were always, after they signed up, a part of the great sacrifice millions of Americans give to this country so we can have what we have. I sit here and I think about it, and I think about my family members who served. My dad, my uncle, certainly my grandfather, who arrived at Pearl Harbor just after the bombing. You think about them, and then so many others, and then I think about families who are actually, whose family gave, they made that ultimate sacrifice. I have a nephew that's in service now. And it's just one of those things where you think about it, but you don't think about it. And then when it happens to you, it's elevated. So Memorial Day is dedicated specifically to the fallen. It's the soldiers, the sailors, the Marines, the airmen, and service members who never returned home from war. These were not abstract historical figures or anonymous statistics buried inside textbooks. These were real human beings with dreams. They had fears, family. They all had future plans, things they wanted to do to loved ones. These men and women had ambitions, personalities, and unfinished lives. Many of them were incredibly young, barely more than teenagers, thrust into horrors most of us can't imagine. They fell on distant battlefields, in jungles, deserts, oceans, skies, and streets far from home. Now, while wars fade in the history books, the grief that they left behind never fully disappears. Memorial Day exists so that a comfortable, distracted nation does not forget the terrible price others paid for its freedom. Memorial Day is not about those who came home. It's about those who never got the chance. So good morning, Mike. Welcome to the show. Good morning, Texas Ranger with the big iron on your hip. There you go. Mattress sales. There it is. Hope you're having a good Memorial Day so far. It's early. Out in Cali, I forget y'all 2 hours earlier than we are here in the SIP. So good morning. Hope you had a good weekend so far. It's been a rainy one here. So, yeah. So wherever you are enjoying your Memorial Day, be thankful and proud of the sacrifices that were made for this day, because there were quite a few. Changing the guard at Arlington National Cemetery, which is always You know, it's funny, when I was young, I didn't appreciate that nearly as much as I do now. And it is amazing the things with which your life and your viewing of life and where you're at in life and how it changes you, the things you consider more important than others. Like back then when I was young, it was like sports, women, nothing else. That was it. Fun, excitement. Now something like this, the changing of the guard, it is very, to me, it's just one of those things, you watch it and it's very poignant when it happens. And the pride I have in our military, and I've never served. I never got the opportunity. I was not allowed to serve. I have chronic asthma, bronchitis, and all that. And then at the time when I was coming up, you had a little snippet, you had eye issues, you had all this stuff. You couldn't do things. They wouldn't let you do things. You were considered a liability on the field, a battle. And because I always wanted to be a pilot, even though I was told I was too tall for a pilot. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know how true that was, or they just didn't want me flying, which may or may not have been the right idea. But regardless, there's always that part of you that regrets not serving. Because I've always been active. I've always been a sportsman. I've always been proud of the military, wanted to be a part of it, but just it never worked out. And I was always, and that's, especially when you're older and you look back, it seems to be a part of your life that's missing when you never had that opportunity. Because I think it is an important opportunity to do something that you do for your life and for your countrymen. I think the men and women who serve are just special. And here's the thing, no matter what you get in it for, right? Some people get in it for, hey, look, I can get my college paid for. And that's all great. I get these great business opportunities, and that's great too, because I think for people who serve, those opportunities should be there for sure. But then sometimes you just find yourself in these situations that pop up, and you find yourself in the mix of something where it may call on you to give everything you have and more. And you never know if that's going to happen or not. It's part of serving. You see, because for the true cost of war, most modern Americans, war is experienced through what? Movies, documentaries, what, history classes, social media clips, or news headlines. That's how most of us experience war. But for the people who actually fight wars, the reality is far darker and far more personal than anything Hollywood can fully recreate. War destroys bodies, minds, relationships, and generations. You know, young soldiers leave home carrying these ideals, right? They're very idealistic. They have these great ideals of courage, patriotism, and duty, only to encounter unimaginable realities of war involving what? Violence, fear, chaos, death, trauma, loss, survival. The emotional scars of war often continue long after the battlefield goes quiet. Many veterans return home carrying invisible wounds, PTSD. You know, it's becoming an everyday colloquialism now. Survivor's guilt, depression, addiction, emotional numbness, and difficulty reconnecting with normal life. And that life affects everybody differently. And then meanwhile, you have what? Politicians who are sitting here debating wars from television studios and podiums, while ordinary young men and women carry the physical burdens of conflict directly into combat zones. You have students in colleges, safe and warm, getting their 3+, getting to say anything they want to, hold up signs and pretend they're doing something, while you have real men and women out there on the battlefield. And it's things like that again. The true cost of war is rarely paid by those making the decisions. It is paid by families, soldiers, and communities left forever changed by sacrifice and loss. Because the people who start wars rarely are the ones fighting them. And that is just the truth of the matter. And it's always been that way. You know, there was a time when a king would actually lead his men onto the field. Would actually lead his men onto the field and wouldn't just sit in the back and go, oh yeah, you go here, you go there. Oops, there goes another one down. They were in the midst of the fighting. That's when those leaders just get their hands dirty and say, I'm going to show you how to get this done. And they would be amongst it, getting it done. But like going back to this PTSD, survivor's guilt, depression, the addiction, I had a cousin who came home from Vietnam. I remember this. Boy, it's one of the things I remember most of my childhood because me and his younger brothers were very close. And I always spend time over at their house. But he became such an alcoholic. He would wake up with nightmares. I will never forget him waking up because he was in, I know he drove a tank and he fought in tanks. He was a gunner at one point. But he woke up one night out of a dead sleep. Me and my cousin were in the living room playing. Oddly enough, there was a board game they used to have. And it's not one I've seen in years. We had carriers, had all this stuff. It was a battleship type of game, but it wasn't battleship. And we're playing, and he wakes up out of a dead damn sleep, just like he's firing. This goes on for like 5 minutes before he screams and passes back out again. And that wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't a one-time thing. This stuff happened consistently. And he could never shake that. Cost him, of course, his marriage. You know, life was not easy for him. It was a horror he just could not shake, and alcohol is the only thing that helped him cope. We didn't have the term PTSD back then. It's not a term that existed. Mike says, Army, 1981 to 1985, Cavalry Scout Combat. Thank you for your service, sir. It's just on a day like today, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying your barbecues and commemorating it and celebrating these men and women. Fire those grills up. Just don't forget why we celebrate. That's the big thing. Don't forget why we celebrate. And it's funny, the further we get removed from some of these conflicts, it seems like we sometimes tend to forget. Right? I mean, and they call these the forgotten generations. Think about this. I want you to think about this. I'm putting this show together, and I love this sort of thing. So I really kind of get into it. I try to organize my thoughts, and I get a little sometimes. And you'll probably hear that. You've probably heard that so far on these podcasts, but I get that way, and I make no excuses for it. It's just kind of a raw deal. But they call these the forgotten generations. Take World War II. These are America and Americans who have produced multiple generations of warriors who answer their nation's call during these times of crisis, like World War II, Korea. No one really ever talks about Korea. The Vietnam War or the conflict, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. And here's the thing. Each generation returned home carrying its own unique trauma and complicated legacy. Some were welcome home as heroes. World War II, man, the parades, America was on point. We come out of the Great Depression. America entered World War II and whooped ass. They did. They made a difference. They carried the day. And then the Korean War happened. Whoop, another one. Let's go. But others returned. They came home to division, to neglect, to protest, or silence. Vietnam veterans especially carried emotional scars from a war that deeply fractured American society itself. Many service members spent decades quietly carrying burdens the public rarely acknowledged or understood. We treated those men and women who just answered the call, who did their duty, as villains. While your protesters marched on campus, the hippies marched everywhere. Talking about how bad these men and women were. These soldiers marching into these jungles in a war they were never going to win because politicians were never going to allow it. And it wasn't the politicians we held accountable. Say what you want. They didn't really suffer. Politicians do what politicians do. Like every dirty snake oil salesman, they shift blame, point fingers elsewhere, misdirect, and keep rolling on. And even today, countless veterans, they struggle privately with the aftermath of experiences most civilians will never fully comprehend. And Memorial Day reminds America that sacrifice does not end when combat ends. Some wars continue inside the minds of survivors for the rest of their lives. Families continue carrying grief long after the headlines disappear. Entire generations quietly absorb emotional damage that society often overlooks because it becomes uncomfortable to confront directly. And now we have a name for it, and we call it PTSD. And we talk about it, and it's pointed out, and we hear that people suffer from it. But yet, unless you served, you don't truly understand it. Because in modern America, there's this forgotten gratitude. And one of the growing fears in modern society is that America, and especially Americans, right? They increasingly take freedom for granted. Younger generations raised inside comfort, technology, entertainment, and constant distraction often inherit freedoms without fully understanding how fragile those freedoms truly are. Memorial Day increasingly risks becoming just another social event rather than a national moment of reflection. History repeatedly shows that civilizations often lose appreciation for sacrifice during long periods of comfort and prosperity. But freedom has never been permanent throughout human history. Every right, protection, and liberty people casually enjoy today exists because somebody at some point defended it through sacrifice. Memorial Day is meant to remind society that stability itself is fragile. Peace is fragile. Civilization is fragile. And nations that forget the cost of preserving freedom eventually risk losing their understanding of why sacrifice mattered in the first place. A society that forgets sacrifice eventually forget how fragile freedom really is. It's not just given. You earn freedoms. You work for it. You sacrifice for it. Our forefathers sacrificed for it. America wasn't just created in 1776 when we finally rose up. It was sold a century earlier when people had gotten tired of the monarchies and the dictatorships. When a new land had opened up and the people in that new land truly started discovering what they had and what the possibilities could be. I think perhaps the most powerful thing about Memorial Day is that it stands above politics. And I was asked the other day about this show and politics. Well, I don't like talking politics, and that's fine. I get it. I hate talking politics too. Unfortunately, it's a very vibrant part of our life right now. And at some point you take a side. You've got to take a side. You stand one way or the other. But on this show, we try to look at everything. Because what I believe in, what I've always believed in, is truth. Everybody has a version of the truth, but the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's there. And then people start picking at it and redistribute that truth how they want to see it. But the actual truth is there. So I don't care what side of the spectrum you're on. If you're wrong, we're going to say you're wrong. If the truth backs up that you're wrong, then you're wrong. If the truth says you're right, well, then you're right, no matter which side of the aisle you're on. But it always comes to facts and truth. And politics has a long history of bending truths, of completely changing what truth is. Because in today's America, we are fractured along nearly every line imaginable. Political ideology, race, religion, class, culture, and the endless noise of media. And here's the crazy thing. Like kids today, they're being taught about racism and all these other things. And the sad truth of it is, when I was growing up, we had started getting past that. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. The Civil Rights War was won. Everybody had their rights. Did you still have some hangers-on and some haters out there? Absolutely you did. You had pieces of trash everywhere telling a human being they couldn't do something because of the color of their skin. You had that trash out there. It existed. But I grew up in Texas, and the part of Texas I grew up in, my friends, this wasn't a factor. I grew up around blacks and Mexicans, whites, everybody. And you know what we never called each other? That's my black friend. That's my Hispanic friend. That's my white friend. We were just friends. But today, you look at today's society, and that's all it's like we've gone backwards. It's like we've totally gone backwards. And why is that? Because there's power in it. There's power in a country divided. And this political ideology that separates us and fractures us, the race, religion, class, culture, and the endless noise of the media who drives the whole thing. We argue, we scroll, we shout past one another, often treating our fellow citizens as enemies. We don't talk. We don't have conversation. Yet you walk through any military cemetery and the divisions vanish. Row after row of identical markers stand in silent formation. And beneath them lie Americans from every background, rich and poor, black and white, immigrant, native born, believer and skeptic, all united in the same final act. They gave their lives for something larger than themselves. The battlefield has never cared about party affiliation. Bullets do not check voting records. Mortar fire does not pause for cultural differences. In the crucible of combat, soldiers stand shoulder to shoulder, not because they agree on politics, but because they share a common duty and a common flag. Memorial Day is one of the last truly unifying traditions we have left. It calls us to remember that before we are Democrats or Republicans, before we are red or blue, we are Americans bound by the blood of those who came before us. In an age that rewards outrage and division, this holiday quietly demands something better. That we honor shared sacrifice before we indulge in shared contempt. That we remember our common humanity, purchased at such a high cost, before we tear it apart. You know, one of the most powerful truths about heroism is that heroes never viewed themselves as heroes at all. They're just ordinary people from farms and small towns, working class neighborhoods, broken homes, cities, and communities all across America. And here's the other thing about heroes. Here's the thing about heroes a lot of people never talk about. Many were scared. Many doubted themselves. Many simply did what they believed was necessary because protecting others mattered more than protecting themselves in that moment. Real heroism often looks human, vulnerable. It looks uncertain and imperfect. It is not about invincibility. It is about sacrifice despite fear. Hollywood often does what? It romanticizes war into cinematic spectacle. Watched the movie last night. That just epitomizes that sentence right there. But the reality is that most military heroes were simply ordinary people placed into extraordinary situations who chose courage when it mattered. Memorial Day honors those people, not because they were perfect, but because they were willing to give everything they had for others. Because most heroes don't look fearless. They just look human. And I think here, as we get to the end of this special FAFO podcast on Memorial Day, I think the bigger FAFO is this. The deeper lesson behind Memorial Day is ultimately about responsibility and sacrifice. Civilization itself survives only because previous generations were willing to protect people they would never meet. That reality becomes increasingly uncomfortable inside a modern culture that's consumed by selfishness and outrage, distraction, instant gratification, and political division. Memorial Day quietly asks a difficult question modern society rarely wants to confront. Would this generation still sacrifice for something bigger than itself? Think about that. Would people raised in an age dominated by algorithms, consumerism, and social media still possess the emotional resilience to endure genuine hardship for future generations? Because history shows that nations survive not merely through military power, but through willingness of ordinary people to place duty, sacrifice, and shared purpose above themselves during moments of crisis. So I've got these questions I'm going to ask you. You can leave them in the comment section down below. If you're live on chat, you can put them in chat, your answers. And these questions are these. Do you think modern America still understands sacrifice? Has society become too distracted to appreciate freedom? And what do you think Memorial Day should truly represent? And finally, do younger generations fully understand the human cost of war? So look, tonight, before the fireworks, before the cookouts, before the noise and distractions, before the swimming pools, and everybody having a great time, which you should absolutely do and be happy to celebrate because it was earned. Remember this, somebody never came home. Somebody's final moment happened in a jungle, on a battlefield, in a desert, on a ship in the air, or far away from everyone they loved. And it's because of that sacrifice, millions of people they would never meet were allowed to continue living freely. Memorial Day is not about glorifying war. It is about honoring the people who paid its terrible price. So it is my hope today, as you get through all that, you think about these people. You think about the men and women who gave all, who made the ultimate sacrifice. It is Memorial Day. Mike says the movie Black Hawk Down was about my unit, and I hated it. It put in Hollywood BS. Made my brothers look like crybaby pansies. I tell you what, we were tough, take no nonsense, real soldiers. Oh, wow. That's interesting. And, you know, that's kind of the thing about Hollywood, too, is when you look at some of these, I find myself more and more questioning the validity of what I see when they're trying to represent an actual situation that happened. 13 Hours is one of my favorites. I love that movie. especially after hearing those guys tell their stories and seeing how closely the movie got to what they said happened. I knew they had to combine a couple of characters, and I understood that. There's some things that you can only do in a 2-hour movie. I get that. But like then some of these things, they completely change, like you talk about, making your brothers look like crybaby pansies and that sort of thing, especially from people who lived it, has to be just wild and just upsetting. Cody says, I don't think so. Nowadays, most of the kids growing up only care about themselves. And we found that that's the culture we're in, right? That does tend to be the culture we're in. I love Platoon. What a great movie that was. Boy, that movie right there was something else. Yeah, that movie was insane. They don't make them like that either anymore. I mean, it was gritty and just real. It's funny. People who've never been to war, people who never served, they play video games like they understand strategy because they're playing a video game, right? They play Call of Duty. They play all these other first-person shooter games. And because I've played them, I've heard the dialogue. How these guys think, well, if they were real, they're pretty sure they would be, one of the baddest guys on the battlefield. It's easy to say that when real bullets aren't flying at you, when real bombs aren't exploding next to you, when you don't know that the next step you take could be an IED and it rips you in half. I watched them just re-enlist. Oh, what is his name? Is it? Oh my God, I'm gonna mess it up. Pete Hexas just swore him in the other day, and I had his name. I meant to put it in this in my notes today, so I'd have it. And I can't remember. I'm trying to find his name real quick. It's Joey Jones. That's it. Staff Sergeant Joey Jones had his legs blown off. He was I think he was a bomb specialist, right? He successfully got so many. Disarmed so many, and one got him. And now he's re-enlisted to help, to give back. And I love that. I thought that was a beautiful story. I think it's something like if you can serve in some capacity, and where they're not saying, well, you may have lost your limbs, we have no use for you now. They're saying, yes, if you want to serve, we will find a role for you to serve. And I love that. I think that's great. I appreciate everybody coming on board with us this morning, becoming part of the show. Like I said, you can follow us on Kick. You can follow us on Facebook if you want to become part of the show. If you have comments you would love to leave, that's how you do it. If you're listening on Spotify, if you're listening on Apple Podcast or Amazon Music, you can follow us on Rumble, on YouTube, on Kick. Leave your comments at the bottom of these videos. Follow us on the FAFO Podcast on Facebook. Leave your comments down below and I'll read them on next stream. And we stream every day, Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. We don't have a certain length we stream to. We stream until the stream is done. And we try to talk about things that are important to all of us from an ordinary, everyday viewpoint. I am not a specialist in politics, history, or any of these things, but I do believe in doing research and finding out about topics that interest me and that we talk about on here. And I think that's important. And that's what we try to do. Try to talk about things that normal people talk about, not politicians, not news media, not celebrities. They try to have an opinion and an informed opinion that's not and force it onto you. We talk about what normal, everyday Americans talk about, how we do it. And that's what this podcast is. This podcast is your podcast. And I'm not ashamed to talk about everything. And I'm certainly not worried about ever being wrong, because that's going to happen. We try to minimize it. But if it happens, it happens. We apologize, we go on. But we're not afraid to talk about it. Not ever. We're not afraid to say the hard things. We're definitely not. We don't avoid it. We don't say, well, I can't say this. Yeah, we can. It's America. Let's go. Roy Benavides, the real Rambo. Oh, I'll have to look him up. I will have to look that up and check that out. But guys, gals, enjoy your Memorial Day. Remember what this day is for. Enjoy your barbecues. Enjoy your families. But never forget the reason we're allowed to have those things. Despite what they're teaching our kids on college campuses, never forget why we have the freedoms we do. Why this country is the absolute greatest country that's ever existed on this planet. Remember that. It's the men and women who served and gave all. And we wouldn't be here without them. Happy Memorial Day. You are listening to the Fuck Around and Find Out podcast. Truth, facts, no BS. Let's effing go.
Four on the floor, have a tank of gas. Dusty boots on the wood, let the whiskey pass. I ain't preaching from a pulpit, I'm talking from the scar. You can dress up a lie, but it won't get far. They call it toxic when it burns your tongue. I call it true when it's finally